Okay, we are now live. We are going to allow a few minutes or a couple moments for the attendees to filter in. We are expecting quite a few people tonight before we begin. And I'm just going to allow a few more moments before we begin. It looks like people are filtering in.
Sounds great.
Okay, now looks like about it. So let's start. Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Gramis. I am the Public Information Officer at Lehigh County and also the host for the 2021 Citizens Academy. Thank you again for joining us. If you have before, welcome back. If not, thanks for joining us this evening. I would like to remind everyone today, before we begin, that today's presentation will focus on the history and role of corrections in Lehigh County. We ask that you refrain from all questions and comments until after the panelist is finished presenting or during a break in the presentation when prompted. This is a disclaimer for everyone that tonight we are only accepting questions related to tonight's presentation. Any off-topic questions or comments will be withheld, and then we will move on. Any aggressive or disruptive remarks will result in automatic dismissal from the webinar. If you have been with us before, you know how it works. If not, if you would like to comment or ask a question tonight, please use the raise your hand option to be recognized. If you're joining us using the link provided on a computer or mobile phone app, you will need to click on the raise your hand button. If you're joining us tonight by telephone, you will need to enter *9 on your phone to ask to speak. The moderator will then unmute you and let you know you're able to speak. After you ask your question, we will then take away the opportunity to speak and then we'll answer the question. Other than that, I am going to pass the mic back over to Janine. Janine, the floor is all yours.
Great. Thanks, Laura. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me tonight to discuss the Department of Corrections for Lehigh County. I'm going to take you a little bit through the history and talk a little bit about the dynamics of the department, what we do, and some little bit of data and stats. And along the way, I pause for any questions so that we can have a good dialogue and get some of your questions answered as we go. I know this is not the ideal setting. I personally prefer to be in a room face to face with people when I do a presentation. So this is kind of an awkward setting, but I guess after the last year or so, we might all be getting used to this kind of thing. But I'm hoping at some point we can get back to where we can be in a room together and actually have a face-to-face conversation about these type of things. But at any rate, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules on this holiday eve weekend as we're coming into, and I'll get started. So the first slide is what I already said. Welcome to the Lehigh County Department of Corrections. We're going to, there we go. We're going to step back in time for a little bit of the evolution of the Department of Corrections, because although everyone knows where it stands today and at 38 North 4th Street, we might not all know how we got to where we are today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where we came from. In 1817, so going back a little bit of time, the first county prison was constructed at the 4th and Linden Street site. And there is a picture that I found of that site. It looks a little bit different now as you drive by as far as the scale to street level. But that is very reminiscent of many county prisons that are still active today and have that look of a castle-like exterior, which we do not look like that today. We are much more of a modern day high-rise. So in 1986, if you're from the area, you might remember this, a federal lawsuit was filed by inmates, and they were citing overcrowded conditions and therefore basically unconstitutional conditions. So in 1988, under pressure from a federal judge, Lehigh County agreed to start working on plans to build a new prison. And then in early 1989, the judge ruled the maximum inmate population at the Lehigh County Prison had to remain under 242. So for each inmate over that number, Lehigh County would be fined $100 per day. In late 1989, rather than continuing to release prisoners, as I understand from people that were in the department back then and for the many years to come, that was quite the ordeal, looking at the daily roster every day and working with the judiciary and other departments involved and determining who should get released and who can't and for whatever reason. So rather than that process continuing, a makeshift temporary prison facility was open at our Salisbury site to take the overflow until the new prison construction was completed. So in 1992, we opened the first phase of the new prison. There are towers in the prison is what we call them. So on the phase 2 was half of the towers in the prison being open. And 2 years later in 1994, we opened the second and the final phase of what stands there today. And that's an aerial view of the jail as it stands today. Those are the towers that I'm speaking of. And it looks exactly like that right now in 2021. So the jail was built as a state-of-the-art 250,000 square foot direct supervision high rise. So direct supervision means that the officers are on the housing units with the inmates. Some of the housing units, there are podiums for the officer. It's kind of like a workstation for paperwork and supplies and things like that. But basically that's the only place that the officer has other than to walk around the day room, interact with the inmates, do their rounds and their tours, and just continue to be observant for the safety and security of the housing unit. Before direct supervision became the preferred architectural and management style of jails, there were more remote style jails and linear style jails. And you can see a lot of that when you watch movies, the long hallways of bars and cells that just go for what seems like miles. And you would see staff that would just roam up and down those sort of linear style hallways, and that's how they would manage inmates. And of course, over the years, we've learned that that's not conducive to managing in a safe and secure manner. It's much a better management style to, sorry, I knew that was going to happen. A much better management style to be in the housing unit and being able to interact, because communication is the number one key to successful management of the housing unit. And you can't do that when you're behind glass and doing indirect supervision, and you can't do that just walking up and down a linear style. So that's just a little bit of history of direct supervision and how that's evolved over the years. So correction officers, like I said, work inside the units and interact with the inmates that way. So the facility has a maximum capacity of 1,363 beds. However, we operate a capacity of 1,267 beds. And what that means is we can absolutely house 1,363 inmates, but our one housing unit, we reserve that for emergency bed space. And frankly, prior to the pandemic, we had such an overflow of programs happening that we actually used that as program space as well in the day room area of that housing unit. So we prefer to keep that housing unit closed down. It wasn't, when it was first built, it was built as a gym and converted at some point in time prior to me working for the county. So we keep that as what we call emergency bed space. So our operational capacity we use as 1,267. So in 2011, our Community Correction Center was born. It was a 400-bed facility, which provides a cost-effective alternative to a secure environment. This led to the closure of the women's facility, some of you might remember, on 6th Street, and the ladies were then transferred to the new facility. So the facility houses both male and female residents, and I believe I have 2 pictures. So there's a view of the front door, and then there's one that gives you next a view of the entire facility. So that is our Community Corrections Center. So this facility affords sentenced individuals very prescriptive rehabilitation programs, as well as the opportunity to enter the community for work. They also performs community service work, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and further pro-social activities under more structured parameters. The Community Correction Center allows an inmate that's sentenced to look for a job, to go out to work if they have one, to participate in programming. They can do outpatient treatment while they're there, and they can continue some of the programs that they had already started at the jail. We have similar programs in both facilities, and then a little bit different ones in both facilities. And so it's an environment where they can wear their own clothes, and it's really that step closer to re-entering the community, and provide them the tools and resources to be able to return and hopefully in a positive manner. Okay, so our juvenile detention center, and I don't have a lot to say about it because we closed its doors in early 2014. Since then, we have contracted with other counties to house our juvenile offenders at a per diem rate. So our juvenile offenders are housed in other counties that we contract with. And there is no sight in the future for reopening that, as the population of juvenile offenders is relatively low. Okay, so I'm going to take you step by step a little bit to imagine yourself, you're arrested, and you're processed into the jail. So the committing authority brings you into what we call our admissions and discharge area. There you go through central booking, and central booking is on the oversight of the district attorney's office. And you're processed through central booking. You wait for what will be a video arraignment. And then at that point in time, if you can't make bail or you're not released for other reasons, then we are given that person into our custody, and then we process them into our system. They are put into our system from a variety of questions. Their property is logged in, and they see medical. Medical goes through a very lengthy and detailed history and intake on them, to kind of gain some perspective and insight into the person from a medical perspective, for a safety perspective, from a mental health perspective. And then you are placed into our classification housing unit, and you're placed into a 2-person cell. It's about 6 feet by 10 feet. And you're secured in that cell for about 18 hours a day. Again, some of these slides represent what normal operations would be and not necessarily operations in the midst of our pandemic. So this is a view that we took from inside of a cell. Not all the cell doors have bars on them. Some of them are a regular door with a window slot and a tray slot, but this is looking out into the housing unit. So we're surrounded by concrete, right? Concrete floors, block walls, steel doors, steel tables. They look like picnic tables and benches that are secured to the floor, but they're made out of steel. There's plastic chairs. There's a TV in the day room. And under normal circumstances, so a regular general population housing unit can house up to 96 inmates. They're split by 2 different tiers. There's a lower tier and an upper tier, 2 inmates per cell. So that's 48 inmates out at any given time. So we do usually a lower tier block out, and then the upper tier blocks out separately. It's better to manage smaller numbers like that for not only the officer to manage and supervise, but also for the inmates to be able to access services and the telephones and all those type of things. It's much more conducive to that, to go out to the rec yard, to play handball or basketball or whatever they choose to do. So there are more activities and better conducive environment in smaller numbers like that. You can purchase your own TV in addition to the one that's in the day room of the housing unit, and the inmates do pay a one-time fee for their cable. It's $35, and that takes them through their entire stay with us. So it's not a monthly bill, if you will, like you and I would pay. It's a one-time fee. And they can also purchase commissary items, much like you and I can go to a convenience store and pick up the snack food items that we want. Hygiene articles, the hygiene articles are not something that they need to purchase in order to shower, and they have the ability to purchase additional items if they choose to, other than what's provided. Some people like different types of shampoo and soap and things like that than what we provide. But the commissary is delivered right to their door. Basically, it comes to the housing unit to them. They have an opportunity to get their bag, sort through it, make sure they got everything that they ordered. They sign for it, and then they store it in their cell and enjoy it from there. So what happens along the way if you don't comply with the rules and regulations? So we do have a misconduct process, and we do have disciplinary segregation unit. So the misconduct process and how we do things is very much under a state standard. It's called, we are operate under Title 37. Those are state standards that we are inspected upon by the Department of Corrections Inspection Office. It would be on an annual basis if you were not 100% compliant with those standards. If you are compliant with the standards, you will be inspected every other year, which is where we fall into. So a lot of the things that we do in our policies and procedures are reflective of those standards. So not only do we have to incorporate the language of the standards into our policies, but we also have to have the documentation to show the inspectors that we are in fact following the policies, and in fact provide that documentation for their review when they come to inspect us. They also do a complete tour through every housing unit, basically covering every single area, every closet, every nook and cranny throughout the facility to ensure that everything is in its place and everything is in the order and everything is according to the policy. So misconduct process is part of that standard, where an inmate is in violation of a rule. So there's a report that's generated that the inmate then gets a copy of. The inmate has the choice to go in front of a board, which is 3 people, or they can choose just to go to in front of the misconduct chairperson, the hearing board chairperson. They have time to be able to ask for witnesses. So if their cellmate is a witness or someone else in the housing is a witness and that witness is appropriate to call or make contact with the hearing board chairperson, they will do so. Dispositions can go anywhere from a written reprimand all the way to some days spent in disciplinary segregation. And disciplinary segregation is a housing unit where you've been found guilty of a misconduct and you are serving a certain amount of days within that. You are basically locked in your cell 23 out of 24 hours a day. 5 days at Monday through Friday, you get out for an hour of recreation. We have outdoor individual recreation yards that allow them to go out and get fresh air, and they get showers. And if they are found guilty of a more egregious disciplinary rule violation and they serve an extended period in disciplinary segregation, if they have good behavior while they're in there, they do, under normal circumstances, are allowed a visit. And I do believe we are doing that and getting phone calls and things like that for those that are in that status for a more extended stay. But disciplinary segregation is meant to be a behavior modification tool where someone has an infraction and they go there, and yes, the privileges are taken away from them. They don't get commissary, so they don't get to order snacks. It's not supposed to be like it is in general population because we don't want them to go back there, right? We want them to understand that, what they did, and they're out and they go back into general population and they learn from their behavior, much like we do with our families, right? Where we set standards and we set rules and regulations, and then we have to pull back some privileges in order to hopefully gain some sort of change in the behavior going forward. So that's a little bit about the disciplinary process and the misconduct situation. So we are a no frills operation. What does that mean exactly? Well, we are very cognizant of our costs and our responsibilities to the taxpayer to contain those costs. The Department of Correction is a very large part of the county's budget, and we are very much aware of that. But we have, like we said earlier, a 250,000 square foot building to operate, as well as our community correction center. And staffing is a huge portion of those costs. As well as taking care of the building, taking care of the inmates, paying for the food, the healthcare, the clothing, and the shoes, and all of the other things. We have 5 elevators. We have a lot of square footage to maintain. So a lot of operational costs, in addition to staffing, make up that budget. So there isn't really a lot of fluff, if you will, in the budget. And so the reason for behind some of the revenues that we receive and the various costs for the inmates, part of that is to offset the cost of having a jail and a department in the county. And so we try to be cognizant of that with our taxpayers and try to offset some of those steep costs with the revenues that we can try to generate. So Lehigh County Prison formally changed its name to Lehigh County Jail in 2014. And what's in a name, really, right? Well, prison takes on a whole different sound than jail does, right from the moment it leaves your mouth. When someone says, I served time in prison, or someone says, I was in jail, we already think there's a difference, right? Prison means you did hard time, you did something really bad. And jail says, oh, you probably did something smaller, not as egregious, and you did a quick couple of months, and now you're out in the community. So we really are a jail. We're a county facility. We don't hold inmates longer than 2 years. If they're sentenced for any longer than 24 months, they go to state prison. So with that, we felt that it was time that we were recognized as a jail and not a prison, and kind of got rid of that little bit more of a negative connotation to the name. But we are a facility, like I said, that the longest you can be in the facility sentenced is 23 months and 29 days out of that month, and anything over that puts you in a state correctional institution. So there was a lot that thought and that went into changing the name from prison to jail, but it really is reflective of what we are and what we do. So it may surprise you to know, and we're going to get into some stats. So before I start reading stats, Laura, I think I'll take a second to just see if anybody has any questions on everything that I've gone over before we get into going over some data.
Sure, not a problem. So right now we're going to open the floor to any questions during this break period. If you're joining us by computer, please press raise your hand. If you're joining us by telephone, you'll need to press *9. So I'm going to give it a moment. Okay, it looks like we have a question from Susan. Susan, I'm going to give you the floor to ask your question, and then once you ask your question, I'm going to give the floor to Janine to answer.
Thanks. I have a couple of questions. I'll try to squeeze a few in. It surprised me to think of a maximum security jail as a place for people who have not been convicted. So is that how you consider it? Another question is the juvenile center. Where are these kids being sent, and how far are they away from their families? Is sometimes being disconnected from the community is not conducive to rehabilitation. The disciplinary segregation, are you in a cell by yourself at that time? And is there a limit to how long you can be there? And how big are those cells? And are you allowed family contact while you're there?
Okay.
That too?
Okay. So there was kind of some background noise on the first question, but I think you were asking if we consider the facility a maximum security facility. So county jails are referred to as maximum security, meaning that anybody who's arrested in Lehigh County could be for something more minor, or it could be obviously homicide. So we refer to ourselves as maximum security because we contain all of those classifications within a county jail. So I know that, like in the federal system, there's maximum security federal institutions where they keep the really long-term convicted individuals, and then there's medium security and minimum security. So a county jail contains all three of those within its system. Whereas when you get to like I said, a more federal level, they have the ability to title and house their inmates in different settings, where ours is referred to as a maximum security because it incorporates all of them. The second piece to that was a reference to juvenile detention. So there are contracts in different counties that have detention centers. And I know that juvenile probation, who oversees those contracts, really tries to, keep them within a vicinity of Lehigh County. I'm not sure off the tip of my head where all their contracts are, but I do know that, we use the facility in Berks County mostly. Abraxas is the main, I think, go-to facility for the juveniles. And then the disciplinary segregation. So again, it really depends on the violation and what it is. It could be something that someone was caught with some contraband. It could be that they got into a physical altercation with another inmate, or it could be something that that they were in a physical altercation, and the inmate that they were in the fight with had to go to the hospital and he had severe injuries. So all of those dynamics of the individual circumstances go into play as to the number of charges that they might be found guilty of and how many days per charge that comes. So really someone could be in there for 7 days, 10 days, 30 days. And then while they're in disciplinary segregation, if they accumulate any additional misconducts because of behavioral issues or whatever, so that could add on to their time. And if they're in disciplinary segregation any longer than 30 days, they do have contact with their family as long as they are misconduct free. So for the most part, our inmates don't spend a lot of time in there, but I can tell you that, over the years, we have had some more longer term inmates in there due to behavioral issues. But when you think about it, and you think about today's population was 663 inmates this morning, and the representation in our disciplinary segregation unit was, I have it right here, 16 people. So 16 people out of 663, that means that the large percentage of our inmates are actually following the rules and maintaining in general population. And it's a very, very small portion that find themselves facing rule violations. So I hope that answered your questions.
Okay, we're going to open the floor once more to any questions, see if we have any others. Like I said, if you have a question, please raise your hand. If you are joining us by telephone, please press *9. Okay, it looks like we do have one more question here from Ed. Ed, I'm going to give you the floor to ask your question, and then once you're finished asking your question, I'm going to give the floor back to Janine.
Good evening, Director Donati.
Hi.
Hi, we know each other, but I want to thank you for doing this. I think it could be very helpful, but I do have a couple of tough questions, I think.
Okay.
And I've brought this up in other meetings that you've attended, and I'll give you the questions, and maybe you could jot them down, and then I can be quiet and let you answer. But
Sure.
The Community Corrections Center is a facility with 400 bed capacity. To my knowledge, it still lies empty. We have a tremendous problem with the COVID, obviously. We have inmates who are locked down 23 hours a day, 7 days a week, which you just said earlier that that would be the disciplinary protocol for someone who, had pretty egregious conduct. It wasn't even the first thing you would go to. It would be the worst thing that you would go to put somebody in lockdown for 23/7. But we have people who, through no fault of their own, as you said, except 16 people, everybody currently is kind of behaving themselves, and yet they're in this lockdown for 24/7. Now, with that facility open, I don't think it could be denied, the facility, the community correction center facility, that we could take of the 663 people that you currently have in the main jail, we could easily take, a couple hundred people there, spread them out, and make things a lot safer for not only the inmates who are in your care, and loco parentis, you are their parents, their parent in all practical terms. And I think keeping in mind that we ought to treat other people's children as though they were our children as well, and really serve as parents toward them. I see that because I know you're going to say, well, it's a money problem, it's a staffing problem, but I haven't seen you, quite frankly, go to the Board of Commissioners and, maybe bang the table a little bit and say, this has to stop. You've got to get me the money necessary to staff this community correction center so we can spread these people out and make them safer and not have them in a position where they have to stay in a cell, often with more than one person in the cell, for 23 hours a day. I cannot even fathom being in my own bedroom, which is not luxurious, but it's pretty nice. It's okay. I can't imagine being in there 23 hours a day, 7 days a week, for even 1 week, much less for people who are serving sentences, that are lengthy. Also, people who are in there because they can't afford to pay cash bail, or they're in there because they, had a fairly minor technical violation, or they're in there knowing in their own minds that they're innocent of the charges that they have been leveled against them, and yet there they are being punished in ways that the world human rights organizations decry. Anytime you're serving more than 15 days in what is effectively solitary confinement, it's considered to be cruel and unusual punishment. So that's the one thing. The other question, closely related, is that now we're headed into our second year, Director Donati, our second year of the pandemic, and it's been hellish for all of us to one degree or another, but no more hellish than for these inmates and staff who have to work under these conditions. And I've not seen any change, and I keep close tabs on this. I've not seen any change. I've not seen any political push by yourself to do something in the way of opening up reentry. There's no reentry right now. For listeners who are not aware of what that means is, I'll put it in plain terms. There's no visitation. There's no education to mention. There's no mental health treatment. There's no drug treatment. There's no pastoral counseling. And this, with people under 23-hour-a-day lockdown, I don't know how we're not going to generate much more mental illness out of this unfortunate situation, this really disgraceful situation, and how we're not going to be planting seeds here of future crime, by people who are being traumatized by what they are going through. So, I don't see, frankly, I'm just being honest with you. I'm not trying to pull punches either. This ought to be hurtful to you to hear these things, because I think it's hurtful to the people who are in there, including your staff. And the way I look at this, because there's no other way to look at it, you're abusing my child, because I look at every person in there as at least as good
Ed,
as my child. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ed. I just wanted to summarize. Can you just summarize your question so we can continue then? Because I know you had a few comments, so I just want to make sure that we touch the points that you want Janine to address.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I just said there, Director Donati can address it however she sees fit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so yes, we are in the second year of this pandemic, and I don't think that that's news for any of us. I think that there's not a morning call article or a, Fox, CNN, Channel 69 news that we all aren't very well aware of this worldwide pandemic. And I don't know that it's so far from everyone's thought process that we have all of us have had various stages of having to deal with what none of us have ever experienced before since last March, from lockdowns to store shelves that were completely empty and barren of hygiene articles and toilet paper and all of these things. So this is all new. There's not a playbook that said COVID-19 pandemic, how to go about it, how to do it. And, I know that we've been through various stages, and yes, I've been to meetings and I've heard public comment as to, how people are scared for their lives of COVID, as are many people in the communities afraid of contracting COVID-19 along the way. So it's no different whether you're outside or inside as far as fear goes for every level. But certainly what I will say about that is that, we are getting closer with the announcement yesterday from the Pennsylvania Department of Health of vaccines being opened up by, I believe it was April 19th for the widespread community. So those are all good thoughts and good news, and hopefully that we are coming around to a place where we can look toward the recovery stage of this pandemic and how we will slowly open back up. But every mitigation effort that we have made along the way, and albeit you might agree or not agree, and again, we all have our own opinions and we all have our own thoughts, and there's not a playbook for this, but we did what was based on the recommendations from the CDC, from the Pennsylvania Department of Health. And I've said this before, so I know that it's kind of sounds like a broken record, but we've also mimicked so many of our colleagues at our other correctional facilities and what they did to try to mitigate the spread. We didn't operate in a silo and make these decisions haphazardly. We made them in conjunction with all of our other county correctional facilities and state facilities. I don't know of any neighboring counties that have opened their doors wide open yet to this. So I don't know that Lehigh County is unique in what we're doing right now or what we haven't been doing yet. The inmates are out of their cell 2 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I know that that doesn't sound like a lot more than the 1 hour, but we are gradually coming back into, step by step, slowly to a point of opening up more and more. So that's happening. They have a lot of communication, not the screen visitation with their families, but they do have a lot of communication as we see that through the tablets with messaging and video visits and phone calls. And none of that has stopped along the way. And we're very thankful that we were able to get our project completed last year and get those tablets going, because that has been a real lifeline. And it's not the same as visitors coming into the building and sitting and seeing their loved one through the glass. And we're well aware of that. We have an abundance of case managers that work every day on reentry plans for the inmates. We still have our reentry meetings. We still have MISA that meets every Wednesday and goes over individuals that have substance abuse or mental health issues, and all of the stakeholders get together to review that list. So those reentry efforts have not stopped, and they continue to be reviewed and worked on. And we have still operating our therapeutic community housing unit within the jail. So drug and alcohol treatment continues. We have treatment that happens for our youthful offenders. We have a case manager that works with them. We have 3 licensed mental health staff members in the jail every single day that are there during the week. We have a nurse practitioner, mental health nurse practitioner. We have a psychiatrist that comes in to do rounds. So there is mental health. Certainly that has not stopped and has increased during the pandemic, as far as rounds and touching base with inmates that are on their radar. So all of that has been ongoing. We're a 24/7 operation. We've had the staff members in the same gear as they were before the pandemic, as they are now. Let's see what else. Keep in mind, and I guess I have to continue to remind people that we don't choose who gets arrested or who comes through our door. We also don't choose how long they stay. So we're not there to punish individuals. That's not a jail's responsibility. We're there to accept them into the facility by legal means. And then we're responsible, as you said, Ed, for their care and their custody. And that's what we provide to them while they're with us. And so as far as the Community Corrections Center, so the Community Corrections Center is meant for sentenced inmates and is not a facility that just we could split our population in half and just put whoever over there. It's not meant for that. It wasn't operational in that capacity prior to the pandemic or through the most of the pandemic up until December 4th. It was closed temporarily in December because, as you know, and I've been very vocal about this, our spike in numbers and our decrease in staffing. It's not necessarily it's a combination of staffing and also evaluating our inmate population and opening those doors when it's the right time and when I feel that we're in a place where we can do that. So that is a continual assessment, and as the courts continue to open up as we move forward into the coming months, that will continue to be reassessed. The Board of Commissioners, going to the front of the Board of Commissioners to increase my staffing, that's not the issue. Recruitment is actually a big challenge, not only for our correctional facility, but for criminal justice across the board, whether it's law enforcement or other facilities are experiencing the same challenges. I think more specifically in the Lehigh Valley, we're faced with, which is good for this area, but a lot of growth in industry and warehouses. I can travel around the communities every day and see more and more warehouses being built and more jobs being available. And all of that's great for the local economy. But the challenge then becomes my ability to recruit. You know, they are not a facility that works with inmates. They don't have, some of them, 24/7 operations. They don't open their doors on Christmas Day. They may be shut down. So while their wages are now more competitive for ours, it makes it even more challenging to recruit into a correctional setting. And I don't think that that's something that's going to go away anytime soon. I think that we're going to be facing those recruitment and retention challenges going forward in the future. I talk to my colleagues about that all the time, and they are experiencing very similar challenges. So it's a combination of a lot of things, and I don't necessarily know that you know, pounding my fists on any table will fix that. If it were, I would be pounding, you know, for hours, and then we could all be in a better place. But it doesn't work that way. I don't have all the answers as far as how to you know, certainly make bigger strides in recruitment, but we are trying as best we can to tap into all kinds of resources out there to, you know, get, you know, we're using Indeed, and we're out there getting as many, you know, into colleges and all of those things. So it's challenging. Trust me. So it's there's a lot of dynamics that are going on, and it's not as easy as just you know, snapping our fingers and opening the doors and thinking everything will be okay, because it won't. So I post the COVID numbers and stats every Wednesday on the website. I just want to make mention of that so you can keep up to date on that. We changed the format this week. So since we are into our second year of the pandemic, we do have 2020 numbers, and then we started a separate column for 2021 numbers. And as of yesterday, we had one inmate that was currently recovering, from positive. So certainly we are seeing much better statistics, and hoping that that continues as we move forward. And I am always looking for updates on when we will be the recipients of vaccines in the facility. So I know that that would probably be a likely question from someone in the audience. When are we getting vaccines? I continue to wait for that information, and I'm in constant contact with our contracted healthcare provider, who is also waiting for those supplies, and is ready to initiate providing those vaccines when we do get them. So I think that those things, we are very much in touch with what's going on in the community. There are still very limited capacities at events, outdoor events, indoor events. Restaurants are not 100% open to the public. They still have capacity. So we can't just say, throw caution to the wind and get back to normal operations when the community isn't even back to normal operations yet. So what we do goes very hand in hand with the dynamics that are happening outside of the walls of the jail. And I think, like I said, with the news of the vaccines becoming more widespread available in the state, I think that'll be a game changer for us moving forward.
Okay, and to remain on schedule, Janine, did you want to resume with the rest of your presentation?
Sure, we can wrap back around with questions.
Absolutely. So let's get this back on the screen. One moment.
I hope no one minds. I'm going to take a quick sip of coffee. Okay, all right, that was better. Okay, so in 2020, 3,575 commitments were processed. And I have a little asterisk there because this includes all inmates and not just Lehigh County commits. So those numbers reflect anyone coming to the facility from another county, anyone that we held for another agency, and not just those that were Lehigh County arrests only. 3,432 were Lehigh County commits, and 3,645 inmates were discharged. And again, that number also includes all discharges. So the average daily population for the department in 2020 overall was 699, for the jail 656, and the per diem, which is our average population of inmates that we hold for other agencies contractually, was 83. I started with the Department of Corrections in 2012, and I was just talking to a staff member today, and I can remember I started as a deputy warden of treatment, and would sit every afternoon at do classification meetings. And I can remember a time when we were, moving around the population and clearing inmates from classification to go into general population and not having space, and saying, okay, well, these 5 individuals can move into housing unit 2D over the weekend as long as someone gets out. So I can tell you that if you look at, and it probably would have been great to have a slide on here that shows the, last 5, 6, 10 years of the population, it has been on a steady decline over a period of, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years. So, or more actually, because we are in 2021 and I was talking about 2012. So certainly having that number of a 699 is really indicative of all of the efforts that happen in Lehigh County to divert people from being incarcerated. So I think that, pretrial services works, and MISA works, and, facilitating inmates to go into rehab to get those much needed services that they need for the challenges they have with addiction. All of those things are working and indicative of some real effort, as you see from years ago to now with a 699 average daily. So the average length of stay of an inmate in 2020 was 62 days. And that's important, I think, on many levels. I mean, it's certainly important to those conversations when we talk about bail, right? And again, it's one of those things that we have no control over. So cash bail or bail reform isn't really in our bailiwick. but it certainly plays into that. But also, I think it's important to note, when you talk about average length of stay and you talk about programming, and we're kind of in a period of time where we're really dissecting all of that data and information, is that 62 days is a very short period of time. And although it's not short for someone who certainly is incarcerated, but it's a short period of time for a department to really change the trajectory of someone's life. And I think that that's important to remember, because as many programs as we would normally have, and that inmates could choose to participate in, there's a lot of challenges and a lot of challenges for the inmates to be able to make some real strides in such a short period of time. But I certainly think that, obviously it's well worth the effort, and anything that we can do to make someone's reentering the community that much more successful. I think that we all want the same things for people. We all want positive differences in people's lives. We all want them to have better opportunities. We want them to be successful. I think we talk about the same things. We may just talk in different languages about it. But I think that we all want our inmates and our residents to go back into the community and be successful. And it's really hard when, we talk about all of those dynamics, and we have the programs and we can do what we can do, but it's really that soft handoff back into the community, and the availability of services for them in the community, and that support for them when they're trying to get jobs, and they're trying to maintain, childcare while they have a job, and just all of the dynamics that everyone deals with in life, that are certainly more challenging for someone reentering. So I think that average length of stay comes into play when we talk about all of those dynamics. 20.3% of commitments needed to undergo medically supervised detox in 2020. And I think that's an important statistic for people to also know. This might or might not be interesting, but we do a lot of transports, mostly to outside medical appointments. We also do juvenile transports as well. Although we don't oversee, obviously, the juvenile detention. As I said earlier, it's contracted out, but we do that. But we drove 17,304 miles while making 1,204 transports. So our transport teams are on the road quite a bit, even with the lower population. We still do quite a bit of transports to, like I said, doctor appointments or other medical facilities. So the classification of inmates. So when I say there were 3,041 inmates classified, what does that even mean? So I talked a little bit about it in the beginning. When you first come into the jail and you're processed, you're asked a lot of questions, and we get a lot of information from you, and you see it, medical department, and they ask more questions for you. And then you go to what we call our classification housing unit. And the average inmate spends up to 3 days in classification, where they meet with a classification case manager who goes over a lot of initial information, and also gathers all the forms and the paperwork so that we can make a housing decision. Now, since the pandemic, the housing decision isn't as quick because they are in extended quarantine for a minimum of 14 days before they actually then go to their destination housing unit in general population. So prior to quarantine being in place, they would spend up to 3 days in a classification unit and then be housed into the appropriate housing unit. And a lot of thought goes into where someone's housed, whether or not they have any, challenges, whether with mental health, or whether or not they're an older inmate, or whether or not they need some handicap challenges and need a certain housing unit for those accommodations, whether or not they are someone who has expressed interest in having a job in the facility, whether or not they have some substance abuse issues and are interested in our therapeutic community. So there's a lot of dynamics going to play. And then certainly someone's present charges, and whether or not it's a violent felony, or whether it's, obviously not a violent felony, and perhaps something, just a misdemeanor or a simple assault or something like that, versus homicide or aggravated assault or robbery. So those type of things all come into play when we talk about classification. And then once they get to their housing unit, their case manager will meet with them within the first 7 days and go over all of the things that they would need to know in order to fill out an inmate request slip, or whether or not they need to see a nurse and how to fill out a sick call slip. How do they get to speak to their counselor, and what we can do for them, how to navigate the inmate notification book and the inmate guideline book. What does our PREA handout, which is our Prison Rape Elimination Act, that information is critical to go over. How to file a grievance if they have an issue that they can't resolve and they want to file a formal grievance. They talk about our misconduct process. So there's a lot of information that's given to an inmate in their first 7 days in the housing unit. And then the case manager also, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, will go through the programs that we would normally have and where that inmate may want to access it, what programs they want to go to. So 14,511 case manager individual inmate contacts. And that's how many times a case manager sat down with an inmate and discussed all of these things and whatever was on their mind, if they were worried about their family or they had issues accessing housing for a parole plan, or whether or not they needed to speak to their attorney and couldn't make contact from the housing unit. A lot of things go into case manager contacts, and that happens every day. And the case managers have really taken on a huge role in the facility since the pandemic. So not only are they doing that case management on a daily basis and reentry and helping an individual make that transition to the community, but they are also facilitating Zoom court for Lehigh County. So a lot of our court proceedings happen via Zoom, and they manage that as well. So they've been a busy group of individuals, and our treatment department has really kind of held up the fort as far as keeping the process going for courts and corrections during this pandemic. So our healthcare services are contracted with an outside vendor. I've made mention of them earlier when I talked about working with them and getting updates on the vaccine. It's Prime Care Medical. We have medical coverage 24/7 at the jail, round the clock. The medical staffing includes licensed mental health staff, which I mentioned. We have 3 of them. We have a psychiatrist that is part-time and comes in to do rounds a couple of days a week. We have a mental health nurse practitioner on staff. We have a physician. We have PAs. We have RNs. We have LPNs, and we have medical assistants as well. Are we stuck? Here we go. Okay, so just
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I was trying to think what the next slide was, and I was like, it's numbers. I know it is. I don't have them memorized. So in a year's time, just to kind of put all of those services in perspective, there were 6,087 PA or physician visits with an inmate. There were 3,168 sick visits with a nurse, and there were 2,073 inmate contacts with a psychiatrist. So I think those are important numbers to know. So even though our population overall has diminished over the years, certainly the contacts with medical and mental health and the doctors and visits have continued to be there, because a lot of times people come in and they don't take care of themselves, and we need to kind of sometimes peel back the layers, especially during that first couple of days. Sometimes it's a waiting period to see, based on someone's behavior, whether or not it's drugs are involved, and then that's indicative of the behavior, or whether or not there's some mental health challenges happening and perhaps they haven't been on their medication, or sometimes it's a dual combination of both. So it takes us a little bit of time in medical and the mental health practitioners to figure out exactly what's going on with someone. So those first days are very important in classification for us to really observe someone and get a good feel for their behavior. And that's where that 20% being medically detox comes in. So a lot of dynamics goes into medical. And so an inmate, like I said, is explained in the very beginning, and it's in their inmate guidelines, how to fill out a sick call slip if they need to see medical. And that sick call slip is on every housing unit. It's a locked box. The nurse comes on at least once a day to open that box and get out those medical slips. They're not available to us. Only medical has the key. They then take those medical slips and they triage them. And then they're triaged to assign to either a PA or a nurse or the dentist or whoever that may need to be, or mental health if someone needs to speak with them. So they're sorted out that way on every day, and an inmate is seen within 24 hours if that person needs to be seen. Sometimes it can be a sick call slip to get weighed, or for them to cut their nails or something like that. So that may be further down on the list than someone who says, I'm experiencing, a sore throat, or obviously those are big red flags for us when someone has some of those symptoms with COVID. So medical takes care of triaging those and sees them in the order that they deem medically necessary. So inmate receive health care as required by law. We do have copays, medical copays to see the nurse and doctor, just like you and I are. So it's $3 to see the nurse, but certainly if you do not have any money, that has no effect on your health care. You will be seen and treated regardless. Really, those are fees in place in most facilities that I'm familiar with, because we want medical to see those that really need to be seen, and not necessarily focusing time on sorting through, just someone who may want to access medical for other reasons other than needing to be seen because they really don't feel well, or they have an issue that they need addressed. So it really is to kind of keep medical's focus on those that really need it. And so that's part of that process. So in 2020, so now we're going to talk about food and meals. There were a total of 813,600 meals served at the jail. There were 47,225 meals served at the CCC. So a grand total of 860,825 meals were served in 2020. And I'm pretty sure that's more meals than the busiest restaurant in the Lehigh Valley. Absent pandemic, I still think it's more meals than most good restaurants may see. So we are very busy in the kitchen. I think the next slide will show you just a picture of one part of the kitchen at the jail. So that's what that looks like. That's one portion of the kitchen. So the meals are prepared by inmates and kitchen supervisory staff. Again, much like our medical, our food service is contracted out. These are contracts that go in front of the Board of Commissioners for approval. Probably the majority of inmate grievances in any facility is either they feel that they're not getting the right medication, or they feel that they're not getting the right diet. So those are the two major focuses usually on inmate complaints. But the menu is a 4-week rotating menu. It is dietitian approved. It includes medically necessary diets. So whether it's heart healthy, or a diabetic diet, or a low salt, or it also encompasses religious diets. So whether someone needs a kosher meal, or they don't eat meat, or it encompasses a lot of different diets. So there's a lot of variety of diets other than the main rotating menu. So we already talked about this a little bit about COVID, March 13th, 2020. Yes, it's over a year where we closed our doors to visitors and volunteers due to the worldwide pandemic. Our pandemic response plan, again, much like you watch on TV along the way, there were so many changes and things that were evolving. And we were glued to all of those things as well, because as they changed, we revised and adjusted our response based on those evolving recommendations. They were all based upon the best practices that were put out there by the CDC, our Department of Health in Pennsylvania, and certainly our contracted healthcare provider have all been great guides for us to navigate this pandemic. So in a normal year, and some of us, it feels like we forgot what that is, we offer a large variety of programming at both the jail and the Community Correction Center. Inmates can stay active and busy throughout the day. We start programmings right after breakfast at 8:30 in the morning, and they go to just about lockdown at 10 o'clock at night. So our case, oh, okay. I lost my own place. So I talked about how our case managers meet with inmates for a variety of things, especially in those first 7 days, and then on an ongoing basis. But they also meet with the inmates to develop a program agreement for the inmate. And the programs suggested for participation are based upon a treatment needs screening questionnaire that we give to the inmate to fill out. Has a lot of background on family dynamics, any history of drug or alcohol use, their educational background, perhaps if they were employed or not, their current charges, and some other factors. And we use all of that information to sit down with the inmate and suggest programs that we put on into a form and an agreement, and they sign it, and we go over it with them. And it's kind of to give them a little bit of a blueprint while they're with us as to things that we think, based upon the information we have on them, that they may benefit from. So whether that's decision making or thinking for a change or healthy relationships, parenting classes where an inmate participates, whether you're a dad or a mom in a parenting class, and when you're finished with the parenting class, you then have visits with your children in our ground floor visiting room, and we have toys there and we have books there, and it really is a valuable program for many aspects, but certainly for the children and the parent to continue that bond. So we look forward to getting back to those days where we can have those programs again. So we are fortunate. We have over 250 volunteers from the community that come into the facility and provide programming, and they vary from educational to addiction, and certainly our faith-based support programs are huge. And I know that it's been difficult to for the faith-based support. We've reached out to our major larger organizations that come into the facility for what kind of digital services they have and how can we tap into that, and just logistically it's very difficult, and the ones that we reached out to are our major support faith-based organizations. Don't record or they don't have like live streaming or anything on the radio. So we've been, like I said, the inmates have radio, they have access to the television. It's certainly not the same as being able to attend a service. So we've been in communication with those organizations and trying to, think outside of the box and come up with ways that maybe we can incorporate some programming or something into the facility. But it's just logistically very difficult because so much is done via Zoom, and you don't have the ability to see 10 or 12 people at the same time. And that's pretty much, we don't like to put a lot of people in the same room, obviously, to try to keep the number small. So it's just logistically very difficult. But like I said, I'm really hopeful that we're on the road to a recovery stage. So on a typical Sunday and Saturday, actually, we have a variety of faith-based programs that span, again, from 8 in the morning until 10 at night for those that wish to attend. And many of those same volunteers also hold services and programs throughout the week for the inmates as well. So usually 7 days a week, we're going strong. And an inmate could really essentially be involved in programs for a good portion of their entire day if they chose to be that active. So some of the programs that they could participate in, to name a few, we have computer literacy, which is really done all volunteer. We have great volunteers that came forward years ago and said we would like to be active in the jail, and we would like to provide some programming and hear some of our ideas. And we love that. We're always willing to listen to people and come up with some unique and different ways to affect some positive change. Computer literacy, our diploma program, seeking safety, thinking for a change, which is a well-known evidence-based program throughout the country. Reentry, there's a program that's called Reentry. I think got to keep going there. There you go. Relapse prevention, ESL class, employment readiness class. So that's getting an inmate. We do that at the CCC, and we started doing that, oh my gosh, maybe a year and a half or two ago at the jail as well. Going through the process of applying for jobs and how to do interviews. And I know at the CCC, they actually do mock interviews with a panel, and then they also have resources in the community where they send a resident to go get an outfit to be able to wear a suit or whatever they need to do for interviews. So it's a whole process. We have anger management, path recovery, which is part of the MAT awareness. And we have an MAT program in the jail where we continue that medicated assistant treatment when someone comes in the jail. Healthy relationships, stepping up, our Alcohol and Narcotics Anonymous, and our parenting program, which I already spoke about. Next slide. There we go. I mentioned that we have a therapeutic community within the jail. It used to be called DARE. It's now called Recovery in Process Program. We have a drug and alcohol counselor for that housing unit. It utilizes multiple disciplines, 12-step treatment, group-based methods, individual treatment. It's run a little bit differently than a normal housing unit, and they do meet in the day room, and they have open dialogue and communication, and share their stories with each other. And then we also have smaller groups and individual treatment as well in that housing unit. So residents work on better decision-making, life skills, and personal accountability in addition to their drug and alcohol therapy. And all of that obviously goes hand in hand, right? Making better decisions, sharpening our life skills, and taking accountability for our personal choices, which is all part of that therapeutic process. The all-encompassing treatment dynamic is used in hopes of returning the residents in the community with the tools that they need to remain drug and alcohol free. So our Community Corrections Center, inmates can be transferred to the CCC by different paths. They can be a direct court commit from court. Their sentence can include the transfer to the center, so they can be sentenced to the Community Corrections Center. They can petition their sentencing judge on their own or through their attorney, or they can also go through our internal jail review and referral process to go over to the Community Corrections Center. So there are numerous classes, support groups, and Bible study, a survivors group, 12-step groups, and a book club. So some of the programs I said earlier are similar to what we have in the jail, like the parenting, a reentry, computer literacy. There's an Inside Out program done through Muhlenberg College. Some of you might have already heard that. It's been done in the SCIs and state prison. It's really a neat program where college students come into the CCC from a class, and they take a class with a group of residents in the Community Corrections Center, and they do it together And it's a really neat class. And actually prior to the pandemic, we were working with the professor to incorporate that in the jail as well. So unfortunately, we had a little bit of a delay in that, and hopefully we'll be able to work back to that process. Next slide, there you go. So we also have conflict resolution, healthy relationships, decision-making, the employment readiness that I talked about, intervention, relapse prevention, life skills, and another Muhlenberg class was creative writing that she came in and did with the inmates as well that were there. And then there's criminality and impulse control. So a resident is sent to an agency. Was there a slide before that or no? No? Okay.
Did I go too far?
No, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. If that's the next slide, you're good.
Okay.
Okay. So I guess this is the segue into what I talked about earlier, which is the employment readiness. So a resident is sent to an agency in the community to pick out clothing for their interviews. Then the staff conduct a panel interview for practice and provide tips and guidance for a successful interview. A resident is then provided a 10-ride bus pass for their completion. So they're able to take those 10-ride fairs and go out into the community and hopefully have a successful interview and get a job. So we also have a very large volunteer program at the CCC. So this started in October of 2018. 163 residents in total have volunteered more than 6,218 hours at various agencies and events throughout the community. I believe the next slide will be able to talk about some of those places that they volunteered at: the Caring Place, the Museum of Indian Culture, the Allentown Victory Church, the Fountain Hill Cemetery, St. Stephen's Episcopal Church, Lehigh Valley Active Life, Nahima Wall, Whitehall Historical Society, Horses Unplugged, New Bethany Church, Lehigh Conference of Churches, and the PA Music and Arts. So those are the entities that they were able to put all of those hours and work in as a volunteer in those organizations. And that's the extent of the slideshow. We can open it back up for any questions.
Okay. So if you guys are just tuning in or tuned in midway, if you would like to ask a question, simply raise your hand if you're using a computer or mobile app, or *9 on your telephone. Okay, it looks like Sharon has a question. So Sharon, I am going to give you the floor to ask your question. Then once you ask your question, I'm going to give the floor back to Janine. Okay, you may unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. And thank you, Director Donati, for holding this. I think the community involvement in these type of programs are crucial. The more community gets involved and understands things, the better the whole system becomes, which is kind of why I was dismayed when the Citizen Advisory Board ended up being so close and kind of opaque. It seemed like a missed opportunity there. But anyway, the U.S. Department of Justice reports that nearly 75% of people in local jails are there for non-violent offenses. It could be traffic, property, drug, public disorder. And I think it's worth noting that the for-profit bail industry is only legal in the United States and the Philippines. So this is an obscene whole situation. US is an outlier across the globe. Pennsylvania, in many situations, is the outlier across the country. But I heard you compare the dynamics inside the jail to society in general. And I look at that when you look at kids who are learning remotely, how they really suffer. A lot of the kids don't do well, especially special needs. And I look at people with mental health issues. They just are exacerbated in confinement. And with that in mind, the US Department of Justice reports that the rate of mental illness inside of jails is 4 to 6 times higher than on the outside. So when I look, even family, friends, people who are dealing with these things, I just can't imagine what it would be like in the jail. I did hear you say that there were 3 mental health providers. And I also heard that the number of inmates were 663. It does not seem sufficient. And former inmates have stated that the programs on paper, a lot of them sound really good, but when you're in jail, a lot of them don't materialize. And again, I think that's where the importance of having community and returning citizens all at the table. So all of this is to ask, what is the timeline to relieve inmates of that current 23-hour confinement to their cells? Thank you.
Sure. So, as I said earlier, just to reflect back, jails have little to nothing to do with bail. So I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page with that. And no doubt that mental health in jails is definitely challenging for those that are going through it, as well as those of us who are challenged with dealing with someone in jail who's also suffering through that process. And, in a way, jails become the advocates for that person. And we certainly identify persons that need help and need assistance and need something other than being housed with us. And that's kind of how many years ago MISA was born, is to bring all of those stakeholders to the table and identify those persons and really collaboratively try to come up with an alternative solution other than jail. We have advocated over and over for many persons in our custody that were very clearly not benefiting from being with us. And so we completely understand that and are there at the table with you on that. So I don't really know without, having a little bit more detail on programs looking good on paper, but they're not really as good. Part of that is things are as good as we make them. And obviously we have to participate in things and we have to be 100% committed to things to be able to benefit from them. So without having that kind of dialogue with some of those persons that you reflect, having mentioned that, that's hard for me to speak to. But I think that programs are so important for us. And you mentioned the my community action board, and we do have former residents that have been through the system and represented on the board, as well as a variety of professional and volunteers throughout the community, from a mental health, from a treatment perspective, from a college level perspective. So we brought everybody to the table that we thought had a lot of value to bring to that. And I think that you get more accomplished when you have a group that you can sit down with and set some sort of pace and some sort of path to accomplish things. And ironically, one of the things that we are really looking at is our programming and how we can better enhance our program, but also pair inmates to a program that we feel that they can really benefit from. And so that's been the dialogue that's been happening over the last couple of meetings that we've had. And I think that now more than ever is an opportunity to do that we have been on this pause for so long. I don't have a timeline to tell you that next week we will be back to normal operations. Again, it's very indicative of what's going on around us. And we continue to keep our pulse on that. And it really is also very hinged on vaccinations and getting those in the facility and offering it to those that want to participate. And then we'll be able to make some decisions moving forward. And I think that, again, we all have the same game plan in place, which is to get back to normal operations, but it's not flipping a switch. And, we talk about it at work, where I say it was much easier to a year ago to say we're closing our doors tomorrow than it is to open them back up, because there's so many things that have gone on in the last year, and so much that we've all seen and heard about, that makes those decisions even harder, because we have to continue to keep the safety of the staff and the inmates in the utmost forefront of what we do. So I don't really have a timeline for you, but I think, like I said, this month with the accelerated distribution of vaccines will be very telling for us going into May of how we begin to stage our recovery from this. So, and a lot of it'll be a lot of dialogue with our fellow correctional facilities and what they're doing and how they're doing it. And so it's a lot of conversation and a lot of keeping abreast of the latest happenings around us as well. So we will continue to keep everyone posted. I plan on putting information on the website as we move forward into, like I said, further into our recovery stage. So we all look forward to that day when we can start to take larger steps. But I hope that answered your question.
Okay, and our next question we have is from Joseph. Joseph, I'm going to allow you to unmute your mic and ask your question. Once you have the floor, you may ask your question. Then I'll give the floor back to Janine.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, we can hear you.
First of all, thank you, Director Donati. I think this was a wonderful overview of all of the issues that are facing the Department of Corrections. But your presentation raised a couple of thoughts in my mind, and I'd like to just run through them. You mentioned that the average length of stay is 62 days. And this was in respect to what programs can and cannot be provided by a facility such as Lehigh County Jail. What I'm wondering, and I certainly don't expect you to have this number tonight, but what is the median length of stay? That being a measure of how much, half of the inmates are under that number, half are over, and maybe it's the inmates over that number that should really be the ones we're looking at for long-term programs looking at reentry. Somebody that's staying there for a week while their family's getting together bail money really kind of skews the average, but would be reflected in the median. That's my first thought. The second is on the inmates and the inmates coming in that you don't have control over. I'm assuming most of those are federal inmates under the federal contract. And I think this was an issue that came up at a commissioners meeting several weeks ago. As I recall, the department's response to the commissioners' questions was that that was a public document and one could file a right to know request and go through that process to get it. And I guess my question is, why hide the ball? Why don't we just put that contract up on the DOC website with a link and let anyone that wants to look at it, including the commissioners, look at it? And then finally, my question was, you had referenced detox. And I recall that there was a time when if someone came in who was recovering from addiction and was on methadone, they would be allowed to continue on methadone if they had gone to a specific provider that was related to one of the staff members in medical. But if they had gone to other providers, they would be detoxed from methadone, basically meaning they would go through withdrawal in the Lehigh County Jail. And I'm wondering if that issue has changed so that anyone on methadone could continue to be on methadone maintenance. Those are my observations. And once again, thank you so much for being here on basically the eve of a holiday weekend and letting us know how our government works. Thanks.
Thank you. So The medical detox question, we do have a Medicaid assisted treatment program. Years ago, you made reference to perhaps, and I don't know anything about the employee relationship. Our healthcare is contracted, so I can't speak to that comment, but we did not have a MAT program several years ago. We adopted that in the last couple of years. And so we continue someone on, but we use Subutex. I'd have to get a little bit more specific information from medical as far as the methadone, but Subutex is what medical uses to continue someone on their medically assisted treatment. Years ago, it was continued for women that came in and were pregnant, but look, for recovery and someone who's already committed to their treatment and are on that program, we're committed to continuing that and keeping them on that path. So every day, we have inmates that are participating in their MAT program, and we keep that going when they come into the jail. They have to receive the education. For a little while, we had it as part of a grant through the county's drug and alcohol department, and then our contracted medical provider picked up after that when the grant was exhausted. So we are committed to continue those treatment programs for inmates as they're coming into the jail. So I think that's definitely been a change over the last couple of years, and it's the right thing to do to continue that process. That's a good point about the average length of stay. Certainly you can eschew those numbers with those people that stay a week. And so we actually continue to develop our data and our stats and looking at different ways to calculate them and what makes the most sense. And my records department is constantly doing research and working at different numbers, and we're creating graphs and things like that to reflect some of that data. So you bring up a point that we actually are currently kind of looking at and dissecting a little bit more. But it's not that programs can't be provided for people. It's just that, are they the most effective? And like I mentioned earlier, my Community Action Partnership Board has been really focused on our programs and matching those with the right inmates and the right concentration of partnering those inmates with the right program, because you can put someone in a program that's not beneficial for them and they get nothing out of it, and they wasted their time in a spot. And so we're really looking at how we can better assess the needs and the risks of our inmates and match them with the appropriate programming prescriptives for them going forward. And like I said, we have a lot of people, stakeholders at the table that are bringing so many thoughts and ideas in that way. They really get me pumped after every meeting. To listen to them and what they're willing to look at and bring to the table is amazing. So I'm really excited about that. But we're actually on those topics that you just mentioned with regard to that. And now I don't know, did I miss one of your comments?
Let me give Joe back the mic so you
Yeah,
can
sorry.
confirm.
I
Thanks.
thought I wrote down everything. I apologize.
Thanks. You actually missed the easiest one.
Okay.
Just the federal contract.
Oh, okay.
And put it out on the website and let everybody see it.
Yeah, I mean, so the federal contract, the commissioners have access to that. So that's that piece. It's been a contract in place since I think the early 90s. It's a long-standing contract. And actually, those are not the inmates that I was referring to that we don't have control over coming to the door. It's really the inmates that are being arrested locally and committed from local agencies and departments on charges or violations that we don't have control over. So certainly, we have a contract with the federal U.S. Marshals, but we have probably far more control over saying this person comes with behavioral issues or medical issues that we don't think that we can accommodate or treat very well. So that's not the group that I was actually referring to that we don't have control over. It's everyone else outside of those inmates that we don't have control over coming through.
Yeah, and I realize it very much predates your tenure, but it would just be nice if everybody would take a look at it and see exactly what Lehigh County is committed to.
Yeah.
That's all.
I mean, it's like I said, that there's no mystery to it. It's a per diem contract that was, like I said, born in the 90s, and really the revenue that we receive by housing the U.S. Marshals really helps to offset the expenses for the taxpayers. So it really comes down to how much everyone wants to pay for the jail. Do you want to offset the burden to the taxpayers by housing inmates and having some of these revenue sources in place, or do we want it all to fall on the shoulders? And I think that really drives some of that those decisions. And furthermore, there's a federal courthouse right in our area, and so our facility is certainly conducive to being able to provide that housing and that relationship with the marshals to be able to continue their business. So I think that's that was the opportunity so long ago for that.
Okay, it looks like we have another question. This question is from Maureen. Maureen, I'm going to give you the floor to speak. Once you have the floor to speak, you can ask your question, and then after you ask your question, I'm going to give the floor back to Janine. So you may unmute your mic.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Janine, for having this program for us and educating us more on how the jail system. I actually have several questions, so I don't know if you're going to be able to answer them all. But my experience in dealing with prisoners and people that have been in prison is that most of them have experienced some kind of trauma. And I'm wondering whether you do any kind of ACE, adverse childhood experiences screening or assessments of inmates when they come into the jail. That would be my first question. My second question, you said that you have an abundance of case managers and they had made 14,500 some contacts with the inmates over the year. I'm wondering what an abundance is. Like what is that exact number? How many case managers does Lehigh County Jail have for the inmates? And then kind of going back to what Mr. Welsh was saying, you said that the average stay in 2020 was 62 days. So I mean, 62 days is 2 months basically. So I'm wondering, is re-entry talked about from the day they come in? Because that's when it needs to start. If they're going to be leaving in 62 days, they need to have a plan to know how they're going to move forward. So I'm wondering, when does that re-entry conversation start? And then I guess my fourth question would be, because of the pandemic, you said that the inmates were locked down 23 hours a day, which is definitely not normal procedure and really is cruel and unusual punishment. I'm wondering if anyone in Lehigh County has considered lessening the person's sentence. You said that in normal circumstances, people could be out of their cells from 8 in the morning till 10 at night, which is a much different situation. But 23 hours a day, even if you don't have a mental health problem, you're going to, in my assessment. So I'm wondering why, if they have a 2-month sentence, why it can't be lessened to 1 month. And then the other question was about the TC. I think you said the TC, the therapeutic community, is still active during the pandemic. So does that mean that the people that are in the TC pod or housing block, that are they able to be out of their cells more than that 23 hours? And then my last and final question is about the tablets. Are they free, and what kind of services do they provide to the inmates? Sorry, I know that was a lot, but.
Okay. I'm actively writing everything. All right. I'm trying to, I was writing down names of case managers. So I probably used a bad word when I say abundance, because abundance gives the impression that, oh, we have, have too many, or we have more than enough. And really we have a case manager for every housing unit. So we have 6, 8, 9, 10, 11. So they are actively working, as I said earlier, on a lot of things, which regular case management things, and reentry, and also court Zoom procedures. We keep them very busy, busier than normal through this pandemic. But unlike some jails, county jails, I think that we have always been in a good place where we've been able to have a case manager assigned, and their caseload is their housing unit that they're on. So I know that some facilities that I'm aware of have far less than that, and they, don't have the ability to have that sort of relationship with their caseload and see them through the criminal justice process. Like I said, someone comes to their general population housing unit usually within 3 days. Now we have the quarantine in place, so it's a little longer by the time they get to their destination housing unit. But certainly reentry is a conversation that absolutely starts at the door. That's why we hop very quickly on program agreements, and trying to identify people in those first couple of days with pretrial services that would benefit from another place other than jail. So all of that comes into play very quickly within the first couple of days of someone being in jail. So yeah, that reentry absolutely starts from the gate coming in. So keep in mind that I had said earlier that our blockout time is 2 hours every day on general population. The 23 hours was the disciplinary segregation unit. So there was a time when we were spiking our COVID numbers in December where we did decrease that, but we are at 2 hours. And the reference to the programs that run from 8:30 to 10. So inmates aren't out of their cells that entire time. They just have the ability to go to different programs through in that time period. So we still have blockouts under normal operations. So I talked earlier about an upper tier and a lower tier, and that they were out at separate times. So each tier pre-pandemic is out for about 5 hours a day. So we're a little less than half of normal time right now. Like I said, we hope to work our way back up there in the very near future. The therapeutic community. So I talked about this a few months ago, and I know that not everybody may have participated in that call, but the therapeutic community is the housing unit itself is set up a little different. Whereas there's not 2-person cells with a closed door, they're open cells, and there's with our smaller numbers, there's probably about 2 people in a cell, but there could be 4 people in a cell at times. So with the fact that they're not closed in, we felt that they had the ability to program together, although they still separate them and make them sit, hopefully up to 6 feet apart. And when they do those group programming, so the drug and alcohol counselor and the case manager on the unit very much control the logistics of those programs, but the housing unit itself is set up architecturally different. So it's run a little bit different than a normal cell housing unit. And I'm not sure if I hit all of your questions. Oh, I know you had something about trauma and adverse assessment. So I referred to this a couple of times, but part of the neat thing that my Community Action Partnership Board has is some persons with some extensive background in some of that. And we're talking about, we were just talking about our last meeting, how so much of you know, an inmate's background or a person's background is trauma-based, you know, for women and also for men. And that is a huge factor when you start, you know, talking about programming and, you know, peeling back those layers and making those assessments. So that's very much on the forefront of our conversations. Where it'll lead is too early to tell, but I definitely think that we're headed in a direction to, you know, match inmates with better program prescriptives, and hopefully that'll lead to better outcomes. Because again, that's our big focus, and that's what everybody wants, is positive outcomes for successful reentry. So that's very much our focus. And again, we thought that this was a huge opportunity for us while we are still on a pause, to try to you know, focus our attention on that and then reach out to our programming providers and get their feedback, and even you know, getting inmates feedback and former inmates and what works and what doesn't. So that's the track we're on. And you know, I just wanted to kind of share that with you, that is something that's definitely being discussed and on our radar right now.
Okay, it looks like we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So I am going to remind everyone that when you're asking your questions, try to keep it brief, because once it hits 8 o'clock, Zoom will shut down. I don't know. I'm not sure if it'll get to the point where it'll automatically like end the webinar, because I only put in for 2 hours. So it looks like the next question that we have is from Robert. Robert, I am going to give you the floor. Once you have the floor, you can ask your question. Then I'm going to give the floor back to Janine. Okay, Robert, and you may ask your question.
Yes, thank you very much for this very informative presentation and all the work that you put into it. I just wanted to give you a couple of quick questions to follow up on some things that have already been mentioned tonight. One is the MISA program, which I've heard excellent things about, but you mentioned that there's something over 3,000 commitments a year. I mean, I wonder how many people actually go through the MISA referral program. And then a second question, there was mention of a community advisory board that's working with you now. I wonder if you can tell us who specifically is on that board. I mean, I know that Northampton County has had an advisory board for a number of years, and the members of that board and meeting schedule are posted on the county website. So I don't know, would it be possible to do that in Lehigh? So that's my questions for now. Thank you.
Yeah, so I don't have the MISA numbers at my fingertips. I know that those are kept and the stats are kept, and they're typically reported on by pretrial. So I don't necessarily have those, and certainly the commitments that come in every year, that grand total, that doesn't mean that every one of those or even a large portion of those fit into the MISA prescriptive program or for them to be looked at, because these are inmates that are you know, predisposition and have a mental illness or substance abuse order or both, and so you know, that's something that they're referred to that list either by mental health, by their case manager, by it could be law enforcement, it could be their attorney, it could be a judge. So there's a variety of referral processes and sources. And so it doesn't necessarily, I wouldn't focus so much on the numbers that MISA helps as and compared to the overall commitments, because keep in mind that, you know, some of those commitments aren't county commitments, and MISA is here to help our county inmates. You know, and also that not everyone would be, you know, a candidate for MISA. So, but I don't have that number, so I apologize for that. So the CAP board, I can certainly add that. That's a good suggestion. Add information to the website about that. I know that the Northampton County Advisory Board. So they have a very different function. They don't necessarily look at the programming or some of the things that we're starting to, digest and talk about. I know that they function in a grievance capacity with hearing inmate, the final step in the inmate grievances. So it would be hard to compare our different boards because they're completely different functions. And, I don't really have a, the neat thing about my board is that I'm going to step away at some point and allow them to take it in the direction where the members feel it needs to go and make suggestions and recommendations along the way. And I feel that that's an important piece that I kind of step out of that role and allow them to develop those initiatives. And then bring them back to the table for discussion. So I'm in it right now because it's in its early stages, and we have a lot to educate the members on as far as what's going on in the jail and what we have, and sharing a lot of information with them so that they can make better informed recommendations. But no, Bob, that's a great suggestion to put that information on the website as we move along. So thank you.
Okay, and it looks like we have room for one more question. We have about a couple minutes left in the presentation. So Lark, I'm going to hand over the floor to you to ask your question. I just asked I maybe keep it under a minute or two, then Janine can answer. Lark, I am going to give you the floor. If you would like to unmute, and then I'll pass it over to Janine once you're done.
Yes. Hello. Thank you, Director Donati, for answering our questions today. So I had a lot of questions just about COVID and procedures for testing and things to do with COVID in the jail. So the first one is, if a block is exposed, meaning if a guard or an inmate has a positive test for COVID, is the entire block tested, or what policy is implemented to test, essentially who gets tested? So that's one of the questions. The second question is, outside of intake, when are inmates tested? So, at what time are people getting tested, such as, can people request a test if they feel sick? And then the third question is there any ongoing routine testing in people who aren't in intake? So that kind of actually goes along with that second question there. I edited my question a bit. And then finally, is there any routine testing for guards? And the final question has to do with cleaning procedures. If cleaning procedures have changed at all during the course of the pandemic, if they are the same as they were from what you implemented in March.
Yeah. So testing. Are you? I don't know if you're familiar with the website. I do have a COVID data tracker on there. So it'll give you the number of tests performed, positives on both the staff and inmate side. We currently aren't testing staff, but staff have the ability to get tests freely in the community where an inmate doesn't. So our focus was right now and for the last, entire pandemic is focusing on providing that to the inmates. Certainly we do a lot of contact tracing. So where an officer who's getting tested or presumed positive or then ends up being positive, we contact trace back to where that person worked 3 to 4 days before the on-site of their if they had symptoms. And then we also contact trace where they've been, where they might have contact with in the housing units. So when an inmate has symptoms and he's on a general or she's on a general population housing unit, so that they are placed in isolation and rapid tested. Then if they're positive, they go into isolation. If they had a cellmate, that cellmate is also placed into quarantine, or if they're positive, isolation. And then the whole housing unit goes into quarantine. So yes, to answer your question, yes, it does affect the housing unit and their quarantine status. So inmates get tested upon admission into the facility, and then they go into an extended quarantine status of at least 14 days. Early on, we were doing 21 days. We went far and above what the recommendation was, and we had the ability to do that. As time went on and the recommendation was, a minimum of 14. Sometimes it could be up to 17, but we do no less than 14 days before that inmate then moves out of their quarantine status and into another housing unit. They're tested. As a matter of fact, anytime an inmate goes from one housing unit to another housing unit, they're tested. We test our inmate workforce on a weekly basis. We mass tested in December, and then we mass tested, we do 90 days. We also surveillance test. So we've been through the facility several times now. And if you look at our stats, just in 2021 alone, we've done 2,615 tests already as of March 31st. So yeah, it's not just one and done. It's every time someone moves to a different location, we test that person. We do surveillance testing. We test our kitchen workers, and we go back through housing units every so often. And then again, we test based on symptoms, if someone's not feeling well. And I think I covered all of the testing questions. Yes, we certainly changed and enhanced. Enhance is probably a good word. Our cleaning procedures and our sanitation procedures last March, and it actually started in February when information about COVID first emerged, and we met with our chemical providers and evaluated all of our sanitation chemicals to make sure that they were adequate for killing viruses and what the quell time was. And we worked with our staff and our inmates and did education with the cleaners of how long they have to leave things on surfaces before they can wipe them. We purchased machines that can spray down a cell or a common area. Electrostatic sprayers, we purchased several of those. So we have what we call GI cleaning on normal time every Saturday. We enhance that to several times a week. So yeah, we really kind of upped the ante last year, and we have not let up on those cleaning sanitation measures at this time. They continue on to today, and I don't anticipate us doing that anytime soon. We have a lot of PPE, obviously, for staff and inmates, and hand sanitizers and wipes, and so we've stockpiled a lot to be able to keep this going through the duration. And I think that we're hopefully seeing like some light with the vaccinations on the horizon. So, but yeah, we definitely enhanced our cleaning procedures, and we've kept those in place the entire time. And I'm sorry, you might have had a third question, and I don't know where I jotted that down.
Let me give Lark the floor one more time. Just
Yeah,
to
sorry. I don't want to run out of time for everybody, but I'm trying to capture everything.
Okay. No, thank you for being thorough. I just want to make sure, hopefully we don't get cut off at 8 o'clock with the webinar.
Yeah, we're getting close.
Yeah,
Sorry
Lark,
about
you
that.
have the floor again.
Yes. So what is mask tested and surveillance tested? And also just to confirm, so if an inmate asks, they are tested, correct?
Yeah, if they're not feeling well, or they feel that they've been exposed, or and again, we test on admission, so we try to exposure in the community or whatever that is. But there's no we've had inmates request to be tested. We mass tested means that we tested every single person in the entire facility in December, and we've gone back through those housing units again and retested just to and I kind of call that surveillance testing, because we continue to circle back around after periods of time to try to catch perhaps an asymptomatic inmate that way, or someone who's not coming forth with symptoms because they don't want to go into quarantine or isolation. So that's kind of what I mean by surveillance, is we continue to circle back through places that we were at a couple of months ago that have been here for a while.
I believe I cut you off right before she was about to speak. I apologize, Lark. You may
Oh no, I just said thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, that looks like all the time we have today. I would like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Janine, do you have any final remarks?
No, I just want to thank you for everyone who participated. I know everyone has a busy schedule, and it's Thursday night, and tomorrow's Good Friday, and so it was really neat to see people that have an interest, and some of us have had dialogue in the past, and I continue to appreciate your thoughtfulness and your focus on what we do, and hopefully we can continue to have that dialogue and in a positive way, and I just thanks for everyone to coming out.
Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I would like to remind you all that next week we will be having the row officers for the next Citizens Academy. A recording of this webinar will be available starting next week, so be on the lookout for that. Again, I'd like to thank Director Donati for taking the time to speak with us today. And I'd like to thank you guys as well for joining us. Thank you everyone and have a great night.
Good night.